she was definitely the opposite of lightweight. She's a heavyweight in every category. And I think
Absolutely.
the other part of it is that there's just a lot that our society, everything that you just listed off, that's specific to girls and women. It was true for men before Ruth Bader Ginsburg, but it's specific to girls and women. And I think that
Mhm.
now women can break out our credit cards anytime we want to go shopping and anytime we want
Absolutely.
to, yeah, do what we want, and get our own apartment, our own place to live, and it's a badge of honor to be able to do all these things and have all of these things, and really not just assume that that's always the way it's been.
Yeah, that's what I find. I think that most people who, don't really realize how she was such a trailblazer in the way that she pretty much dismantled the male dominated, this whole male dominated society when it came to just being able to conduct business as a woman, or being able to do just pretty much anything, um, before that time, that required the input of a man. And as a result of, you know and I think at my age, and people maybe in my age group, who are, we're the benefactors of her work, but sort of almost in a way take for granted the work that she has done to a certain extent, just because we have thought that it's always been this way. I think we have a disconnect with maybe the women's suffrage movement versus this trailblazing that she did within the legal framework to allow women these rights and benefits that we don't really connect. And so to know and understand that, the first of these types of cases started in the early 70s. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, when you think about that, the early 70s is when in her legal career she began the meticulous work of, identifying the case, because I believe she started maybe, or was a part of a nonprofit organization or
Yeah, yeah.
something, to where, and I think part of the disconnect happens when, Pamela, when you say that people like don't know, everything that she did. A lot of times people don't really understand how, because these things had to come about through case law, as
Right.
opposed to, federal legislation and things of that nature. These were situations where every one of those things that you mentioned, was the subject of some plaintiff who had to, go through a lower court case to be denied, and appealed up, and ultimately, taken up, at the Supreme Court. And
Very.
so,
That's a really important point that you're making.
yes,
I mean, we see parallels between her career and Thurgood Marshall's career.
Marshall,
You know,
right.
looking at all this, the litigation that happened
Yes,
for on the basis of race, and she did something similar, but on the basis of gender. And
yes,
a lot, you're right, a lot of that is a little bit hard. And something else along the same lines is that my parents were part of the civil rights movement, so that
mhm,
generation is one step removed. But I don't
right.
know what it's like to go to colored only water fountain, because I never
Absolutely.
saw
'Cause
those,
we didn't
right?
deal with that. Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think that there's that sort of similarity with the women's
Yes,
economic, mostly their economic things that she a lot of things related to jobs and credit and property, and a lot
yes,
of economic equality that she really pushed for.
absolutely.
My guest this evening, we're talking about Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a woman who was, as these ladies are pointing out, so instrumental in so many things that we take for granted.
Mhm.
How is it, ladies, that you have done, as you pointed out, she was working on behalf of women. There were some things that were being done on behalf of people of color, um, that we have enjoyed. But how is it that we can make sure these things are not forgotten? Because I think that's the challenge in both of these areas, things that have been accomplished for women as well as things that have been accomplished for people of color.
Well, certainly. I think that, based on the way that um, she really took a very detailed and methodical approach to dealing with each and every case that she did. But fortunately, she had the benefit of the civil rights movement. She had the benefit of, case law that had already been put in place, based on the 14th Amendment, which is what's supposed to grant us equal protection under the law. And so she had the framework of, all of, Thurgood Marshall's work, and so she was able to, sort of, I can't think the word piggyback comes to mind, which is probably not the
So
best
she
word,
was
but she
able
was
to build on that legal
to
precedent.
build on that.
Right.
Absolutely.
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 Yeah.
And so she, and she was, and I want to say maybe one of the first cases that she brought before the Supreme Court, for instance, I believe had to do with um, the military. It had to do with a woman who was in the military. She was in the Army or the Air Force, I believe,
Mhm.
and she was not receiving the same kinds of benefits that military people receive for housing and for when you have a family and things of that nature. Well, this woman was in the military, just like men were in the military.
Yeah.
But this was a section of benefits that she otherwise would qualify for, except the fact that she was a woman. And so she had to take that case to court and dismantle that process in order that women who had families, who had children, could receive, I think it was housing allowances or whatever it was.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so she, and so to your point, Pamela, and the question that you posed about, how do we keep this, how does it happen? Because we're in a very trying time
Mhm.
now. We're in a very trying and dangerous time within the legal, structure of this country, where just as she was, and just as she was instrumental in laying out the framework for those benefits and for those rights to be afforded women, there seems to be an equal, effort, to undo a lot of things that took place during that time. And
Yes.
and
Yes.
it's and
Yes. There is absolutely that. And I'm
yes,
really glad you said that, Sherry, because this is one of the things I tell my poli sci students all the
yes,
time. People who ask me, I say, just as determined as you are to get something changed, there's somebody on the other side who is equally determined to make sure it doesn't change.
that's
So
right.
you have to figure out if you're going to outlast them or they're going to outlast
What
you.
last you? Absolutely. Absolutely.
And that's definitely the case now. That's why we have the Me Too movement, and we have just as many people saying, we don't think women need all that. It doesn't take all that. We don't think women should get this. We need laws to say women should get paid the same amount of money as
Right.
men. We still have a pay gap today.
Just right today. I mean, and when you think about just that example there alone, it wasn't until Barack Obama was in office. One of his first bill that he signed into law was the Fair Pay Act. That was in 2009.
That was in
And,
2009,
and
and that was based on Ruth Bader Ginsburg's dissent in that case.
it was based on her going
Against
against the majority opinion in a case
in a case.
that federal legislation that Congress had to enact legislation to correct that situation, or to correct situations for people going forward. Because I think that lady,
No, she
she
was not included. Right.
right, she wouldn't have been included because I
Yeah.
think they ruled that she was too late in bringing her case. I believe is what it was.
Statute of limitations, right?
Yeah,
Mrs. Statute of limitations
yeah,
for that case. And so Pamela, I think the only other thing I would just add is that there's always opportunities for advancement, and there's always opportunities for retrenchment. And I really do hope that this, current generation of young women understands that, someone like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was 87 when she passed, a much older lady, maybe they don't feel like they can relate to her, but there was a lot of things that were in her heart that she did out of love and did out of commitment for generation to come of young girls and women, to make sure that they did have at least an opportunity to make the same amount of money as a man, or buy their own house, or not, or get out of a marriage because they have their own money,
Yes.
right? So she did. And the other thing really respected and admired about her life is that she wasn't, I think I was saying this to Sherry earlier, is that she wasn't somebody who was just out there beating a drum. She personally lived a lot of this discrimination. So she knew what it felt like to have, herself be in these situations. And so she had a lot of empathy for the clients that she represented and for the cases that she presided over.
My guest this evening, attorney Stephanie Mickle and in Washington, D.C., and attorney Sherry Percival in Jackson, Tennessee, having a wonderful conversation about the life and legacy of Justice RBG. RBG.
The notorious.
The
Oh, the notorious. Who, this little bitty Jewish woman gets a rap song
Yes.
and an opera written about her. Stephanie, you talked about something that I spoke to someone who went to FSU Law School. In 1973, Sherry, as you talk about the years and how recent this all has been, in 1973, when she went to law school at FSU, that there were no bathrooms for women in the law school. And then even in the Florida Supreme Court, when the first woman was appointed to the Florida Supreme Court, there was a bathroom for the justices, and then there was a bathroom for women, but not a justice who was a woman. And Stephanie, you worked in Washington, D.C. For a number, still working in Washington, D.C., but your observation, I mean, we're just talking about a bathroom, but how telling is it
Yes.
when you see that there's not a bathroom for women?
Yeah. It's, what Pamela's referring to is something that struggled when I first started working for Senator Nelson in the Senate, United States Senate in Washington. I would, be on lunch break or whatever and start looking for a bathroom. And it was immediately curious to me that it took me longer to find the women's bathroom than the men's bathroom. So I started paying more attention when I have to go over to the Capitol or go over to the House side, to the office buildings, at the number of women's bathrooms, and more importantly, where they were located. You have to work a little bit harder to find a women's bathroom. And that is because when those buildings were built a couple hundred years ago, they did not have women's bathrooms at all. So women's bathrooms had to be created either from broom closets or old storage spaces or offices. And it was just, and even now they're pretty much tucked away. There's only a couple of exceptions that I can think where it's relatively easy to find a women's bathroom. The Capitol Visitor Center being one of those, and that's relatively new. But it's because women weren't there, they weren't staff, they weren't certainly weren't members, and they weren't, and even they weren't lobbyists. They weren't coming there to conduct the people's business typically, and if they did, they just had to hold it or figure something out because bathrooms just were not plentiful. And it is interesting to think about how older buildings did not really contemplate the presence of women in those buildings back then.
Well, when the effort was being made for women to get the right to vote, it was said that politics was a very complicated issue, and to give women the right to vote would be a wasted vote. So there are people, that was just 100 years ago.
Right.
And, ladies, I always like to point to the fact that We have the cellular authority to create the humans that we go to ask permission.
That's a good
That's true. We have the ability
one.
to have complicated things all the time.
Yes. Well, and that's the thing within, our this whole male dominated hierarchy and structure that is the foundation, of this country. Uh, Typically, up until the 70s, you had women being characterized as, these different labels that accounted for the absence of these types of rights and benefits that men were afforded that women just weren't, as if women were inferior or subordinate or a lot of the same type of labeling. So for us, particularly as Black women of color, who it's sort of been like a double dose for us, but this was historically the type of phrasing and phraseology that would be present within a lot of the different rules or regulations or reasons as to why women did not have these types of rights and benefits that were afforded to men. I found it telling that when Ruth Bader Ginsburg first went and argued that one of those early cases before the Supreme Court, she as she meticulously laid out the framework and the framing of her argument, she argued a complete Supreme Court case, and the justices didn't have any questions, which is something that is unheard of. You it
Yes.
is unheard of for justices to not have questions during your argument, because that's how you make your argument. I mean, she literally was able to articulate her entire argument where she pretty much answered anything that they might have even thought about, or they probably felt too ashamed to even to ask questions about. So I always thought that was very fascinating, to know that. But I think you described her as a tiny giant. I think that was just, she was just a superb. Her mind, most people sort of characterized her as this sort of, really reserved, and she didn't do a lot of small talk. She didn't, but she was always thinking. She was a thinker. And she, in those early years of her life, she dealt with, I think even within her marriage and raising her children, a lot of adversity. Her husband, dealt with a lot of illness. And so she was just laser focused on her work, it seemed. And so, I mean, we are in here, we are the benefactors of that work, because it wasn't until I was much later in life before I really learned the real impact. Because like I said, there are a lot of things that we just take for granted that
Yeah.
we thought was always there when it just wasn't. I mean, the early 70s
I
is
think
when
I think she was laser not just on her work and her life purpose, which was to advocate for women's equality, but she was also laser focused on her family and her priorities. I mean, she and her husband met when she was 17. They got married right out of college. She was very committed to, them raising a family together and supporting him in his career and he supporting her. They talked about how they shared parenting responsibilities, which is very progressive for her husband. I tell
yeah,
you, very progressive
especially back then.
back
Yes.
then. Absolutely, absolutely. But I think that's a really special quality about her too, is that she was just very clear about who she was and what she was here to do, and she got it done.
Yes, she did.
Mhm.
Hey, Stephanie, turn your sound down a little bit. We're getting a little feedback
Okay,
when you're speaking. Yeah, but make sure that you can hear us. I don't know if you have an earpiece that you can put in or not.
how about now?
Yeah, that's good. That's
Okay.
good. And let me thank all of those who are watching on Facebook, and our cousin Sylvia Neely posted. Look, look. Let me be transparent. I have these two outstanding attorneys as my guests tonight, but in full disclosure, Sherry's my cousin, and I went to church with Stephanie's mother.
Okay.
Right, right. But I only
You
found
had
that out
direct
today.
access.
Just to be clear, everyone, I learned that today.
Yeah, she did just learn it today.
I didn't know
But
that. That's awesome.
thanks to another wonderful woman in our community, Miss Angie Terrell, who made the connection and was able to connect me with Attorney Nickel so that she could be on. So Sylvia, I was trying to look like, I just knew Sherry. She had to post on Facebook, Attorney Sherry,
Right.
and you are cousins. I'm sure you know that.
Yeah. Is that what Sylvia put? That's her.
Okay, you blew my cover, Sylvia.
She's
But
just excited.
nevertheless, say again. What's that, Stephanie?
I said she's just excited, I'm sure.
Yes.
Well, I'm very excited to have both of you on. But Stephanie, when you talk about family, your father was a judge,
Yes.
and talk about how that um, living in and you talked about both of your parents being involved in the civil rights movement.
Mhm.
How watching your father was one of the first appointed,
Mhm.
and seeing him in his role.
Mhm.
Um, what were the conversations like in your house about what you could or should do?
So yeah, so my father has had many firsts in his life, in his career. He was the first Black to graduate from University of Florida. And the first of many, court benches, up until to be when he retired, he was the former Chief Justice for the United States Northern District of Florida. And so for me, the conversations that he and I would have and all my siblings actually, what we would have would go something like this. You can do anything you want to do. You have to work hard, put your mind to it. The only limitations you have are the ones you set for yourself. And I really took that to heart. He was not his personality, he was not the type of person to try to push you in one direction or another. And in fact, I was kind of late to the legal game, so to speak. I did not want to go to law school. I wanted to go to politics. So that was what interested me. And I ultimately decided to go to law school my mid to late 20s, I think it was. It was
So
a few
Stephanie,
years.
we lost a word. You said you originally what?
I did not. I originally was interested in politics, not
Politics. Okay.
right, right.
Mhm.
And I think I give my dad a lot of credit for was just really teaching us how to develop a plan and thinking through things. Like you were describing about Justice Ginsburg, he's very much a thinker. Mind is always going. Was extremely laser focused on his career and breaking down barriers as well. And so I definitely saw that in him. He's not a talker. Uh, Tends to be a little bit more on the quiet side, but he let his actions kind of speak for him for what he wanted to do and that type of thing. And so, um, yeah, I think that's important. And I will say this also. My dad is very pro women. His first two law clerks were women, and he's had a number of law clerks that are women. He, strongly believes in strong women. Both my sister and I went to women's colleges. Amy went to Spelman. I went to Smith. He's about as feminist as they come. He joined the Women's Bar Association and was the first man to join the local women's bar
Wow.
association. But because he understood, like there's more that we have in common than not, and so I think that really set a foundation for the things that I've been able to do. And he actually, incidentally, you mentioned my book, Pamela. He wrote the foreword in my book, and he talks about how, he would take me places as a kid. I was like the only 8-year-old in the room, little kid in the room with all these lawyers, and they would be talking to him, and he would make sure that they spoke to me.
Mm.
Didn't talk over me. they spoke to me and, really demanded that respect, even from the very fancy lawyers that just wanted to talk to him because he was, a judge. But yeah, it definitely taught me things that way. So,
Yeah. And so, Sherry, growing up in Jackson, Tennessee, and, I don't know how many women of color that you saw were attorneys. Did you? Do you recall any?
Growing up, no. There were the women attorneys that I engaged with. I did so, and I think I'm hearing some feedback. I'm sorry. Do I need to do something? Do I?
Is your volume up? Turn yours down a little bit.
Um, turn it down just a little. The women attorneys that I encountered, I didn't do so until after I came back home, after I had left home. But so from an attorney standpoint, I would say no. There were there was a very influential the first Black woman principal was my principal when I think I was in maybe the fifth grade. And so, her presence, she was this tall lady that was just, just had a larger than life personality. And I remember, being greatly impacted by her. I actually, in my direct family of my grandparents, I am a first generation college graduate myself. And so, going on to the United States Army right after high school. I left and went to the Army right after high school, about 3 weeks or so, and spent about 4 years in the Army before going to college. So that was, my path was, was a little different in that regard. A lot of people will go to college and then go, but mine was the opposite. Part of the reason that it was the opposite was because I was a teenage mom as well. So, I spent about a year and about 2 years in the Republic of Panama before, during the Operation Just Cause, the little war that a lot of people sort of forget about, dealing with, Panama and Noriega. But I had and I was a mom then. And when I think about Justice Ginsburg, her and that particular case that I mentioned, which happened in the early 70s, it was just 11 years. I went to the military, I want to say in 86. And so those benefits that you're supposed to receive when you have a family, that just happened automatically for me. Well, I take for granted the fact that that had just been put in place, within 10 years, or so before that. And to know that, I think is just really phenomenal. Just the impact of, the work that she did, and that she did as an attorney in her early practice was just phenomenal, that we all are benefactors of in so many different ways.
Yeah, and I think as we're talking about this, and I will say that I invited some other people to be on with you all
Mhm.
who felt like that maybe her work as a Supreme Court justice did not directly impact them, and that's why this conversation that I'm having with you all is so important, because I think that, and these are women who are in your profession. I think that as you pointed out, there's so many things that we take for granted, even um, the right to vote. Just that
Mhm.
women haven't always been able to vote,
Absolutely.
and then the fact that, Stephanie, you have a public relations firm in Washington D.C. in a place where they didn't even have a bathroom for you.
right,
Right.
right.
And now you have a public relations firm, and Steph and Sherry, to be building your own law practice.
Mhm.
You're not under anybody else. To be
Right.
able to build your own law practice. I
That's
think that because some of these things that we are doing, it seems so automatic
right.
that we're not telling the story enough.
I think that's it.
I think
It
that's it.
seems automatic because we're not telling the story
Right.
that as much. Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely it because we see a number of Black women attorneys in all walks of life, for example,
Hmm.
and just because they just are really good at making it look easy, people might assume that it's easy, and
Right.
that's not the case most of the time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And even, when you think about RBG and, and I'm not sure of this, and I probably need to research before I say this, but I believe, even though she wasn't the first woman justice on the Supreme Court, she was the first woman, I believe, on the Court of Appeals in
DC
the district.
Circuit.
Yes, in the DC circuit. She was the first woman. And I think that her placement there probably was even more instrumental in because she was appointed to that circuit before the first woman justice, which was Sandra Day O'Connor. If I believe she would have been
Mhm.
Rita would have been appointed maybe a year or two before Sandra Day O'Connor was appointed by um, I
Carter.
believe President Carter.
I think it
Ruth
was
Carter.
Carter or Ford.
Probably so. Right. So,
Carter, I think.
she really just, broke some ceilings as little as she is. And, and
Phys-
just
Physically.
physically, yes, and
Right.
metaphorically, she was really just such a trailblazer in, with the legal work that she did even before getting to the bench as a justice. So.
I think that's really significant because
Mhm.
she went
Right.
directly from practicing to the DC Circuit, which is
Yeah,
one of the prestigious
phenomenal.
appellate courts in the country. And President Carter saw something in her to say, no, she needs to go straight there. And that's remarkable in and
That's
of itself.
remarkable.
Then to go from there to the Supreme Court is even more remarkable. It really
Mhm.
speaks a lot to the different ways in which she impacted jurisprudence.
Yes.
When you talked about the work that she was able to do, kind of patterning her work after the bridges that were built and roads that were paved by Justice Thurgood Marshall and the civil rights movement. How much have these two movements, the civil rights movement and the women's movement in this country, while they had their times of being separate, how much have they impacted each other?
I think it's been a huge impact,
But
because when you learn to put together an appellate argument in law school, they teach you to look at precedent that's similar or related, right? So fine, you don't have a case that's about race that's directly on point, but maybe you have one about gender that's directly on point, and then you sort of work your way through that way. And so no, I think that they go hand in hand, and people who understand how constitutional law and constitutional theory is developed can see those parallels. Now, ideally, you want it as precise as possible, as directly on point as possible. But I think it would be a mistake to not see that. And then let me tell you the other reason why I think it would be a mistake because cases that are argued on the basis of race specifically and on the basis of gender, but for different
mhm.
reasons, impact women of color, right?
With-
Impact
that's for both
50%,
ways.
50%
Absolutely.
of the population. And
Yes.
so, so even if if you're arguing a gender case, it impacts women of color, right? So either way, these cases I don't think should be separated. I think you miss out on a lot of the opportunities for really understanding how the law can be developed when you do that.
Yeah, and she was just so instrumental in being able to, make those that intertwining to a certain extent, in order to, use those same arguments to benefit women that have been used to benefit minorities and people of color. You know.
And ladies, um, my guest, attorney Sherry Percival in Jackson, Tennessee, and attorney Stephanie Mickle in Washington, D.C. Ladies, when we look at the legacy of RBG,
Mhm.
RBG, let me make sure I get the right letters right. Trying to sound cool, RBG. Then I got to think about it. When we look at that legacy, um, how long? I mean, do you all see that there could have been a path to this, or how much longer would it have taken? Do you think? You have any idea of you know? Yeah, with the work that she did, was she just in the right place at the right time, or I mean, do you think it could have happened anyway?
Gary, do you want to take with that one?
You know what? I think that it was bound to happen. How long it would have taken otherwise, were she not there, or were she not, this giant of a legal mind to orchestrate things the way that she did. I think that she was very particular in the way that she selected various types of cases to be brought forward. She selected cases very meticulously in order to become involved with the local council of whatever that area was. And I think she always had a motive in mind, regarding the expansion of the theory into an area that might not otherwise, was addressed in a prior case. For instance, there was one case, I want to say maybe in the mid 70s or so, that dealt with a man who had lost his wife in childbirth. Okay. So his wife died in childbirth. And so he was, caring for his baby, and he could not get survivors' rights under Social Security the way that a woman would be able to, were the situation reversed. And so, even though that was an issue for women's rights, because even though he was a man and he was a father who had to bring that case forward, because of the way that the Social Security laws or whatever was structured at the time, that was something that was not available to him, that had it been the reverse, his wife would have had the benefit of. And so here he was caring for this baby, needing these benefits, and was not able to do so. She was very, she developed a roadmap to be able to expand the legal theory to cover just a plethora of circumstances and situations, and the way that she did that was just, it was just fascinating. It was just fascinating the way that she did that. So I think that, while I think, to answer your question, eventually it would likely have happened. I can't imagine us being women, eventually it would have happened. The way that she did it and the timing that she did it within was just instrumental. And because she was so focused and methodical about the way that she developed all of that framework and laid it out, from one case to the next.
I would also say that, again, with appellate litigation, there's a lot of thought that goes into who should be the plaintiffs, what type
Absolutely.
of cases should be argued or brought forward to make a change to legal precedent. And she was very good at figuring out what was going to make the best argument to get the legal change that she wanted.
Absolutely.
That said, I think that there are certain qualities that were specific to her
Yeah.
that really helped her to, in addition to her legal brilliance, really
Mhm.
helped her to be the right person for the job at that
Yes,
time.
absolutely.
That, I mean, you and I were talking about this earlier, Pamela. She's very beautiful. She's very much a lady.
Yes.
She said her mother wanted to make sure she was a lady.
Yes.
Was she and she didn't give that up. Even at the Supreme Court level, she made sure she had her earrings done, her
Mhm.
her what she make jiggies. I can't remember what's the word I'm looking for. The things that she collars that she wore
Her
around.
cause. Yes, yes.
She was very intentional about a lot of those things that
Mhm.
really represented who she was and what she was about. And I think that confluence of qualities and
Mhm.
aspects to who she was as a human being
Mhm.
helped her to move forward what she was purposed to do, and and what she was ultimately able to accomplish. I think about it today. There are a lot of women lawyers out there. There are a lot
Mhm.
of women lawyers who can choose to practice law in a
Or not.
different area of the
Yes.
law because of what she did, right? We
Right.
don't have to just say, okay, we're only going to be this type of attorney or that type of attorney or this type of law clerk or that type of law clerk. We can choose whatever we want. And that is in direct part
Mhm.
to the sacrifices and the commitment she had to women's equality.
Right.
One of the stories that I heard about her was growing up, she had a brother, and there was more emphasis on the brother moving forward. And that kind of remained a thorn with her to help push her, propel her into this kind of thinking. I'm the smarter of the two, but the effort is going to be put on him because he is the boy.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Today, when we talk about this world of things being smoother, they're still not where they need to be. But for women and women of color, and do you think that look, I was told when I became a parent, you worked so hard because you grew up poor, but let me tell you, you can't teach your son poverty. So
Mhm.
now that we have some people who don't recognize the contributions that she made, um, what is it going to take to help women to push forward because we're still not where we ought to be? It's just more comfortable than it used to be. Um, what is it going to take? I saw an interview with her where she said that she would like to be able to pull out her pocket constitution and see something in the Constitution specifically for women's rights, not just, you know, all of the other stuff that's been passed, but something specifically for
Mhm.
women's rights.
Mhm.
How do um, are we too comfortable right now, do you think?
Uh, I think that there is a comfort level, which I think sort of speaks to the the notion that we started out talking about, how we have taken for granted what these rights that we are afforded now that just came into bear, in the last 40 years. We just, these things really just happened. It hadn't been all that long ago that um and the actual cases that took place just that time frame ago. Not to mention, once the case is okay, once it's decided, then the mindset of people still has to change. The mindset of people still have to be more accepting from women as well as men about this new Supreme Court case that happened, that's now going to impact this segment of society or this segment of society. When just to think about how, first of all, to understand how cases even get to that point, and thinking about how her legal mind was working as she developed, that framework to bring these cases to bear is just phenomenal in and of itself. Because in order for a case to make it even to the Supreme Court to even be decided, you think about it, every state has its own Supreme Court, and so cases that make it up through, through the state level, or into a federal appellate court level, then all of those appellate court levels and those Supreme Court levels in those various states, all of those cases don't get to go to the Supreme Court of the United States. The United States Supreme Court then has to choose, based on what's called a writ of certiorari, which cases that they actually want to hear. And those cases, have to deal with, a novel type of issue in order for them to select it to even be heard. And so, the system that she used that touched on so many different aspects, because she had to be very meticulous about which case to get involved in order that it would ultimately make it to that point. And so,
I want to say also, Shay,
mhm.
it may sound to people who do not understand, don't argue like Supreme Court cases,
Yeah,
that's just what Supreme Court justices
it's
do. No,
true. And it's not
there
right.
are people in the Supreme Court currently and in the past that did not have that kind of legal record that she had.
Exactly.
She and
Exactly.
Thurgood Marshall, and then there's a couple others,
That
just legal giants, and they were
John,
very serious about their craft in
right.
terms of arguing, building out this case law. And so,
Absolutely.
I'm sorry, Sharon, I didn't mean to
No,
steal your
you're
thunder.
so right. Thank you for
I
that.
just think that's really important.
You are so right. I certainly, I mean, just the phenomenal nature in which she chose to weave these series of cases for what a whole decade or more,
Mhm.
that she made sure that it, happened to address certain aspects that, that wouldn't have gotten addressed in another area. Um, and
All the
so
while experiencing discrimination herself,
herself,
right? She didn't have a clear path to do this.
absolutely.
Yes.
Graduating at the top of her class and then not finding a law firm that wanted to hire her.
That would hire her, right? Going to Harvard Law and then Columbia,
Columbia
law school to, making the law review. The law review is something that is, just heralded at any law school.
every law
When
school.
you make any law school's law review is something that, as a law student to attain is just awesome. So, for her to be at Harvard, and make law review, and then to get out and have trouble with finding a law firm that would hire her because they don't hire women is, it's just, we don't even think in terms of that today, because we are, we're women, we benefit so, regularly from, from her, her efforts. But
Right.
she
Right.
was challenged. She was challenged. So the comfort level that you spoke about, Pamela, I think that we do have to be, as women, we do have to be very, very, careful and to keep in mind, just as she developed that legal structure, and then when she sat on the Supreme Court and she was within the majority opinion, and in most cases there became a time when she wasn't. She wasn't in the majority opinion anymore. A lot of the congressional efforts that took place because she wrote a very clear dissenting opinion. In a particular case. And so while we do have to be very, as women, we have to be deliberate in making sure that, all of those gains that were made, that we continue to benefit from them, and make sure that they are strengthened, within the legal framework that we operate in.
I think the other thing I would just say is that it is not impossible for Supreme Court decisions to be overturned, and it's not
Agreed.
impossible for laws to be gutted and Supreme Court decisions go a different way. I mean, we
Absolutely.
saw that a few years ago with Shelby
Yes.
versus Holder and the Voting Rights Act, which everyone
Absolutely.
thought was sacrosanct and it would
Yes.
never get touched. And now we have a situation where,
We're
civil rights
back.
and roll completely back.
Completely back.
So, that same type of jurisprudence in the gender space could easily happen.
It could easily happen. Absolutely.
And then you do have a situation where people are now on the defensive trying to figure out, okay, how can we convince Congress to pass laws to change what has
What
been
happened with
taken
the
for granted?
Yes.
Yeah, which is why it is so critical that we exercise this right that we have
Absolutely.
to vote, and to be aware that voting for president is very important, but those senatorial races and those congressional races are critical. The races for when judges are elected are critical, and I think sometimes those elections get overlooked, or the emphasis are not put on those races when we have those are the people who are going to be deciding or play a major role in
Absolutely.
who will take the place of Justice Ginsburg.
Yeah.
Ladies, for the remaining time that we have as we honor the life and legacy of Dr. Ruth Bader, or Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, have you all encountered challenges even today as women of color in this legal profession that you are in?
Yes.
Oh,
Absolutely. I was just, as you were asking the question, I'm thinking, well, which story am I going to tell her? But this is not a one story.
Yeah.
But I'll give you a couple of examples. So I was Senator Nelson's general counsel, and I have sat in many meetings, not because of him, but because of some of the people that came to meet with him, where people thought I was there to get them some coffee. That was my purpose for being there. And
Wow.
so when they found out who I actually was, I didn't mind getting them coffee. Don't get me wrong, I'm a Southern lady. I'm happy to get up and get somebody something to drink if that's what they want. I believe in hospitality, but that wasn't my purpose for being in the room. And I have definitely been in a number of situations, not just with the senator, but even in a big law firm, when I was starting out my legal career, where people didn't really give me the respect that I deserved, because of the work that I had done and what I was, my purpose for being there, as opposed to what they just sort of saw and assumed. So definitely have had a number of those experiences. Yes.
Certainly. Yes. I'd have to agree. Probably more from a more subtle end on my end. I can't say I have been in private practice for going on 18 years now. And before that, I was with a law firm that was primarily a plaintiff's personal injury firm, that had been one of the largest plaintiff's personal injury firms in the state of Tennessee. And so I went from that firm to my own firm. And as I determined which areas of practice I wanted to really focus on, coming from that PI background, I delved into very different things, sort of expanded my horizons into different areas. And one of those areas was an area that was completely male, white male dominated. And so, I think I probably was one of the first attorneys in my area that actually started doing marketing the way that I did, to attract clients in that particular area. That was probably so impactful because the attorneys and the firms that had previously been practicing, they sort of had that, sort of corner of things sort of sewed up, in which they never really just had to do that. So my presence alone, I knew was going to be, pretty impactful, but I was sort of ready for the job. I remember one particular incident where we were at a seminar, and the clerk for the judge had to do sort of part of the presentation. And in part of the presentation, um, before she started, she said, "I want each of y'all to know that," and I won't say the judge's name, Judge so and so, wanted me to let all of y'all lawyers know that when y'all are sitting at counsel's table, all of your conversations are being recorded. And I just thought, you know, of course, and now I'm the probably the newest attorney in this area now, so
Mhm.
I probably have been doing cases now for upwards of maybe 6 months to a year or so when this happened. And I just thought, I just remember sort of sitting back wondering, I can just imagine what those conversations that have been
Been long.
picking up,
Yeah.
that caused her the need to have to say that.
Yes.
Okay. So
Yes.
that's why I say subtle and more indirect, but nevertheless,
I
but we stretch forward.
absolutely. Well, so no, that's a great point, and
Mhm.
we definitely press forward. I know I certainly had to. I mean, once you open your mouth, you can convince people of just about, what you're actually there for. Um,
Absolutely.
and definitely, I think it's easy to overcome some of this stuff, especially when you back it up, which is always the advice I give people is just back it up and you'll be
Mhm.
fine.
Yes.
But I think that there's still those opportunities because there's still these biases, and even when it's not really popular to say,
Mhm.
because you don't want to be accused of being sexist or misogynistic or you fill in the blank or
Mhm.
but there's still these biases that you have to overcome
That's right.
and be aware of. I tell all my interns, especially the women interns, think about what you're wearing all the time. Because
Right.
while it might not be a big deal to you, somebody else is looking at what you're wearing and probably making some decisions about your competence, what's between here based on what they see you wearing.
That's
And
true.
one might not have anything to do with the other.
That's right.
Yeah, that's interesting, but it's right in line with what this small giant lived by. This woman who said her mother told her to continue to be a lady,
And
always be a lady. And I think that is just very, very powerful advice. Even when there was a time that she could have raised her voice, say what you have to say, as you say, Stephanie, back up whatever it is that you're saying, and do it in a way that you keep your integrity.
right.
Ladies, as we will continue to look at what Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg did for all of us, the fact that all of us were able to sit here and, as they say, sit under a shade tree that we didn't plant.
That's right.
Um, what is it that you will hold closest to you about what she did and how it played a role in who you are today?
For me, oh wow, I would have to say, and this just based on, cases that I know about. She was just so instrumental in pretty much all facets of our lives as women. Things that so many of us take for granted, being able to, uh, you know, particularly as a veteran and my experience in the military, I shudder when I think about some of the things that were in place just a few years prior to me being there that I had no clue about. That this woman's work had impacted me on. Just being able to operate within the business world, on my own and as an individual. What Ruth Bader Ginsburg said that her mother said to her was to be a lady, but she also told her to be independent. And she said what that independence meant was, even if you met the Prince Charming of your life, and lived happily ever after, also be able to stand on your own, be able to stand on your own feet. And as women, we have to be able to do that as well. And I would have to say that that's probably that independent nature, and being able to operate as an independent individual, within society is completely impactful on my life.
I think, in addition to what Sherry has articulated, one of the things that I've been admiring about her as of late is just the amount of strength and tenacity she possessed at the end of her life. You
Oh
know,
yeah. Oh wow.
battling cancer, you see her working out, and she was going to work, and she
Yeah.
was like, never say die. And I
That's
tell you what, I mean, for someone who could have easily rested on her laurels and said, I've done enough, you
right. Yeah.
guys, I'm tired now, she was so dedicated and so committed to her cause and to the things that she, dedicated her life to, that even on her deathbed, she was saying, I want to see this and I want to see that. And I want to make sure that all of her, the things that she's put into place would continue. And so that, perseverance is really one of the things that I admired the most about her.
Absolutely.
Definitely, definitely. You know, because we can get a headache and think it's time to go home.
Oh, yeah.
And,
This is definitely not time to go home.
yeah, and to
Definitely
see,
not time to come home. And Pamela, you just reminded me about the piece I'm writing, which is exactly that. This is not the time to get tired.
That's
And I
right.
wrote that piece before she died. So now it's like, oh boy, it's
Mhm.
definitely the time to get
yeah, yeah. You know, I hesitate to even bring this up, but I feel like I should. For those who may have felt like she should have retired earlier, and perhaps we would not be dealing with the politics that we're dealing with now. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't. I completely disagree with that. I
Yeah,
mean,
Okay.
completely.
I covered judicial nominations in the Senate, and the window of time where she would have retired, the Republicans controlled the Senate, and they would have taken, probably
There's just
done something similar.
yeah, there's been another seat. Yeah. It
Right.
would.
It would have been another leader, have been another sort of jockeying for position. So I think she, and I mean, who knows? She could have. She didn't. She had 5 bouts with 5 hospitalizations before she died, and
Yeah.
serious bouts with cancer. And so, who could predict that? I don't.
Yeah.
I don't. Yeah.
Her mind was still just as sharp, and I think she had always said, as long as her mind, as long as she, the thought process that went through her mind to do the work, she was well capable. And so I just know she was the person to do what she did for such a time as that she did it. And so she was quite appropriate.
Forever grateful.
Mhm.
Yes, absolutely. Well, ladies, I am very, very grateful to both of you for carving out this time this evening to share with our audience on Facebook and on YouTube to honor the life and legacy of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Ladies, you are an inspiration. And for such a time as this, I look forward to seeing more from you all as you all pick up the mantle. Somebody's got to do it.
Yeah.
So there you are.
Here we are.
Oh, true.
Yeah, yeah. Attorney Sherry Percival in Jackson, Tennessee, Attorney Stephanie Nickel in Washington, D.C. Stephanie has written a book about women in politics. That's a whole nother show. Stephanie will have to do that. And
Absolutely.
she has a public relations firm in Washington, and Sherry with her law firm in Jackson, Tennessee, and is writing a book. And what a fascinating book it sounds like it's going to be, Sherry, and I look forward to talking to you more about that.
Absolutely.
Let me tell you, ladies, it is such an inspiration to see the works that you all are doing and how you are inspiring so many other women and children who are watching what you all are doing. So Godspeed to you all in every endeavor.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
You're
Thank you.
so welcome. Absolutely. We thank all of you for joining us for this edition of Sisters of Wellness. So, it is our effort to sow into the lives of other young women. And you know what? They may be your same age, but to sow, to share the knowledge that we have and that we're continuing to gain from each other. So we will be back here on Thursday for the Timbuktu Report at 7 o'clock. So I hope you all will join us. In the meantime, for all of us here at the Wellness Network, I'm Pamela Marshall at the Wellness Radio TV and at the Wellness Radio TV podcast, as we spent this evening honoring Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. What a huge giant that we owe so much to, and we have a responsibility to work toward carrying on the works that she's already started and to push things forward. We hope to see you next Thursday. In the meantime, make it a great moment and love in truth. Take care. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.